Hello and welcome to the course Introduction to the Psychology of Bilingualism and Multilingualism. I am Dr. Ark Verma from the Department of Cognitive Sciences, IIT Kanpur. We are in the third week of the course, and from today onwards, I am going to talk to you about speech production in bilinguals and multilinguals. What is speech? Speech is in some sense it's one of the most fundamental skills that we take for granted, but basically that is the language that we sort of that is how we understand our language or communication abilities. Writing came much later, reading came much later, but one of the primary manifestations of human communicative ability is language, which is expressed through spoken words, spoken sentences, and hence is basically referred to as speech. The question that we are going to talk about in the coming 2-3 lectures is mainly concentrated about how do bilinguals speak, or how do, say for example, they manage speaking in two languages without without a lot of interference from either one. How do they switch across languages? How do they code mix a lot of times? How do they basically how are they basically able to communicate effectively, having known having known two or more than two languages? Now the thing is, if we need to understand how speech production works in bilinguals or multilinguals, it makes sense for us to also pay some attention to how is speech production accomplished by monolingual speakers as well, because that would give us a baseline in some sense to understand how would speech production actually take place in case of bi or multilinguals. Okay. So, as I already said, majority of human communication occurs via speech. It includes a range of steps from conceptualizing an idea that a speaker wishes to convey and to basically a set of behaviors that would change the physical environment. Say for example, if I give you a particular topic to speak, or if I intend stand here and intend to speak about bilingualism, the first part of the process is for me to conceptualize what do I want to talk about. The second would be formulating how do I want to talk about it, and the final would be articulation, where I will create some kind of behavior which is basically moving my vocal apparatus, creating sound that carries meaning which will be understood by my listeners. So it is this tripartite process of conceptualization, formulation and articulation that basically explains the process of speech production, and this would be true for monolinguals as well as bilinguals and multilinguals as well. Let's take an example. For example, a compliment conversation. How does this really start? Say for example, you meet somebody, you like, let's say, their shirt, and you go on and you tell them, oh, I like your shirt, this is a very good color, and the person would listen it and would react appropriately saying, oh, thanks, and then you can take the conversation forward by saying, oh, where did you get it? Oh, I got it from this particular market in this city, and so on and so forth. So this is just an example of a typical conversation. We have all kinds of conversations. Say for example, a lot of times you will see that conversations typically revolve around generic formulas. For example, if you want to have a weather conversation, it's typically a decent conversation starter when you're meeting somebody for the first time. So typically people would be like, oh, today is really hot or cold or rainy or anything outside, and the person would say, yes, I am also feeling cold, or I am also feeling rather warm. And then you could sort of say, okay, I hope the weather becomes warmer or colder as it goes ahead, and so on and so forth. So typically, if you see, this process of having a conversation basically has these multiple steps where you are talking about a particular topic, you are conceptualizing how you will put yourself across, and then you formulate the right words, the right sentences, the right form of how you want to convey the message, and going forward you can basically take the message forward to other topics, and so on and so forth. So there are it could be a lunchtime conversation as well. There could be any number of conversations that we have in the same sense. But if you look at these conversations closely, you could ask yourself certain questions. For example, how do we retrieve these linguistic representations? Say for example, when we want to talk about, let's say, somebody's shirt. So I know what a shirt is, I have the conceptual representation of a shirt. Or let us say, if I am going to talk about weather, I know what weather is, what I am talking about. I am talking about the general climatic condition of that place in that moment. So how do we sort of, from these thoughts, how do I pick up linguistic representations that which are best suited to convey this idea? And then how do we organize these representations? We don't speak randomly. We don't speak just a constellation of words which are not organized. We typically speak in a particular order. We typically speak, when we speak, our words are grammatically correct. Say for example, I will not say, oh the weather how it is, oh the weather how is it. We will basically, oh how the weather is today, something like that. So we also organize these representations in a particular order in sense of grammar as well as semantics. For example, if you want to talk about a particular idea, you will basically organize your ideas in a particular sense that it seems coherent and it seems like a logical flow of conversation. So finally, the question that one can ask is that how are these representations, once you've organized them, retrieved them, how are they translated into a form that the motor system can use to generate the physical actual gestures which are utilized to articulate them? See, the first two parts, conceptualization and formulation, are still abstractions of the process of speaking. But the final part, which is articulation, is actually a physical activity, because you need to move your tongue, you need to move your mouth, you need to stop the flow of air in your vocal apparatus in order to speak, in order to create speech. So these are the three very important questions that we can ponder about speech production. In this lecture, I am going to talk mainly about monolingual speech production, but I will encourage you to take a pause at every moment and say, oh, how would this happen when a person has two languages? And we will basically see how we sort of go ahead with this. So as I said, the tripartite process of speech production has three parts: conceptualization, formulation and articulation. Very basically, conceptualization means thinking of something to say, what do I want to talk about? Formulation, how do I express this idea in the best possible way? And articulation is the final part of moving the muscles to produce the sounds that can be perceived by the listener. A very interesting model, a very interesting theory on this account was presented by William Levelt in a model which he named as the Weaver ++ model, and we are going to sort of go through very briefly with some of the stages of this model. You can see that at the top here is the conceptual preparation in terms of lexical concepts. What is a lexical concept? A lexical concept is basically concept which can be expressed in the words of our language. In case of bilinguals, it could be it could be a concept that could be expressed in 2 languages or 3 languages, whatever the number of languages we know. Typically, you will come across more than one lexical concept at any point in time, so you need to do lexical selection. You'll reach a level after that which is called the lemma level, which has both semantics and syntax information. You go to morphological encoding, where you are basically wondering about the type of word that is going to be used. You create a morpheme, then you go to the phonological encoding part, where you are sort of you finalize the morpheme that you have to communicate, but you have to assemble sounds for it, create the phonological word, go to how the word has to be actually produced in phonetic encoding, and then is the gestural score, which leads us to sort of produce speech. Let's go in a little bit of detail of these models, because at this point in the slide I have just sort of given you an overview, but we can obviously visit it in a bit more detail and try and appreciate how this would change, or what will be the special tweaks in this model that we will need to do if we want to explain bilingual or multilingual word production in this. So as we have seen, speech production can be viewed as a process involving a sequence of mental steps. Each mental process accomplishes a smaller goal, a sub goal, and the output of one mental process works as the input of the next one. Now this is something which is peculiar to this model. It basically follows what is called a feed forward kind of a process. So let's say we start with something like, okay, conceptual preparation, which is at the top here, and during conceptual preparation we are choosing about the ideas that we want to speak about. We are choosing the idea that we are wanting to speak about. Oh, do I want to have a lunchtime conversation? Do I want to talk about weather? Do I want to talk about the nice dress that a person is wearing? What is it that I want to really talk about? The output of this process, once you have a sense of what you really want to talk about, is a lexical concept, and a lexical concept is basically an idea for which your language has a label. So the idea is, say for example, if you want to talk about let us say beauty, or you want to talk about a particular person's shirt or weather, your language should have words to be able to express that idea. To take a more concrete example, if you want to talk about a female horse, there is a word in English language called mare, and you can, if you're seeing and talking about a female horse, you can use the word mare, and it basically encompasses all the meaning that you want to convey in the word mare. However, if one were to talk about a female elephant, there is not a single word that that encapsulates that idea. So you'll be forced to use both the words female and elephant, and that will be your lexical concept. So this is basically how what we are doing is we are converting a pre-verbal message into a actual verbal thing by mapping the thoughts onto these words, which are these lexical concepts. Now, one could ask that can all ideas be very neatly expressed with individual words? Probably not, because a lot of times you will see people telling you that, oh, I am so happy that I cannot express in words, or I cannot describe in words what I am feeling at this point in time. So basically what is happening is this process of mapping the thoughts to these lexical concepts is referred to as the process called lexicalization, and lexicalization basically serves as an intermediary between non-linguistic thought processes and the linguistic items or lexical items that can produce verbal expressions to convey these thoughts. So this is precisely what we are trying to do. Now, a lot of times it would happen that the number of lexical concepts that you have for a given idea may be more than one. So, for example, if you want to talk about, let us say, a particular emotion, let's say you want to talk about being happy. So, you can talk about, oh, I am very happy, I am very elated, I am overjoyed, I am in a blissful state. You can basically come up with any number of words or a large number of words to sometimes express a single idea. Now, what would happen in that kind of a scenario? In that kind of a scenario, what would happen is that you will need to select, you will need to perform lexical selection, you will need to select the appropriate word for that point in time. So, do you think that overjoyed is the best expression to convey what you are feeling at the moment, or just happy is the best one, or elated is one? So, you select from any number of words that you are made available with. You can basically select, okay, this is the word that I want to go with, and at this process the output that comes out is called the lemma. Now, a lemma is an abstract mental representation which reflects a slightly intermediate stage between activating an idea and activating the exact speech sound. So, it is something which is very similar to a word, but it is an abstraction, it is not an exact word itself, it is an abstraction of that word. You can say it is a root idea for a given word which carries with itself both semantic information, what is it that I want to convey within the word that I am choosing, as well as syntactic information, how do I want that thing to play out. Say, for example, if I am talking about let us say a particular activity, let us say play. Am I talking about play? Am I talking about playfulness? Am I talking about playing? What is it that I am talking about? If I am talking about eat, am I talking about he ate a sandwich a day ago, he is going to eat the sandwich now, he is eating the sandwich now. So, you can see the root form of this word is the word ate, which is the lemma, but it can carry information both about the meaning that, oh, I want to convey something about the act of eating, but is also carrying the information about the syntax, that is, what is the situation about eating that I want to convey. So, this is what a lemma is. So, therefore, we have said that lemma incorporates information both about the meaning and the syntax of a given idea. Now, once you have an activated set of lemmas, then you move slightly further. You activate the process, or you initiate the process of activating the sound codes that we sort of need for speech to begin. So, then what we are doing is, then we are sort of finalizing upon that exact type or that exact variation of a given word that we want to go ahead with, and we move to what is called morphological encoding. Now, before I talk to you about morphological encoding, I am sure you would know that morphemes are the basic units of language representation. Basically, in any language, they are the basic units in which the language can be cut down into or reduced to. And morphological and morphemes in that sense are basically two kinds of unit which carry meaning. First is lexical morphemes, which can stand alone. Say for example, any number of words you can say: play, eat, sleep, run, cry, etc., etc. These are all free morphemes because they can stand alone on themselves. But if I change them, say for example, if I do playing, then the ing part is called a grammatical morpheme, because per se by itself it does not have a meaning, but once it is attached to the morpheme play, it modifies the word play's meaning. So this one, ing, er, ess, etc. are basically called grammatical morphemes. Now in morphological encoding, basically what one needs to do is one needs to sort of finalize that, okay, this is the word that I am going to go with, this is that specific form of the word. So am I going with eat, or am I going with eating, or am I going with ate? So this exact form of word is basically specified at the level of morphological encoding. Now, level basically says that for each word that we need to speak, we would basically need to specify the morphological form, and hence we would go to the step called morphological specification, telling us how the word is going to behave when we place it in a larger utterance. So, for example, as I was saying, the morphological specification for the word eat includes that it is a root form and its past tense is ate, or its continuous tense is eating. So we sort of figure out that, okay, which form of the word eat am I going to use, and then we can move on further. Now remember here, whichever form of the word that you finalize, you will really need to start assembling sounds of that type. So if you finalized ate, then the sounds that you start assembling will be different. If you finalized eating, then the sounds that you are going to assemble will be slightly different. So having selected a set of morphemes to produce, morphological encoding starts activating the speech sounds we need to plan the auditory movements that will eventually create the speech signal. The speech sound one produces depends on the morphemes that one has activated, and also they have to be organized in the right sequence. Now again, when we speak, we are not speaking phonemes in a jumbled order. While we are speaking phonemes, our words are obviously concatenation of phonemes, but we do not jumble them up. They have to be executed in the same order. For example, if we decided that we want to speak the word eating, we want to talk about the act of eating, then what we will do is we have to not only activate the sounds for the word eat and for the part ing, we have to also ensure that it comes out in the right order. We cannot say ing eat, we have to always ensure that whenever we speak, it comes out in that same order, eat ing. This is basically also very, very important. So the right sounds need to be activated, and they need to be activated in the right order. So just summing up, what have we done so far? We started with conceptualization, we eventually selected lemmas, we went to morphological specification, then we figured out which morphemes we are going to go with, and then we had information about, okay, which sounds we need to activate and in what order, so that we can go further with the process of speech production. Once you have everything with you, once you have the morphemes slotted into the right positions, once you have activated their individual speech sounds, then what you are ending up with is that lexical entry called a lexeme. It is basically how a particular word exists in your mental lexicon, which is your mental dictionary, and for this we need to start activating now the basic sounds that will create this lexeme, and will need to be organized in a particular manner for production. Okay. So one of the organizational schemes that is preferred by human speakers is called syllabification. We don't speak in individual sounds, rather we speak in syllables. Let us look at an example of that. Now syllabification has two parts. It basically requires us activating a metrical structure. Say for example, if I am talking about the word pat, it is a single syllable, or if I am talking about the word patter, it is two syllables. So you say pat and then there is a break and then you say So basically we need to understand the metrical structure where the stress would be. Say for example, the word banana has the stress on the second syllable, na, and the word Panama has the stress on the first syllable, Panama. So basically what we are doing is we are organizing things according to their syllable structure, and also at that same point emphasizing which parts of the syllable will be stressed, which parts will not be stressed, and this information is very, very important because it tells us how exactly we have to produce these things. Say for example, banana will basically involve stress on the second syllable, and we'll speak the second syllable slightly louder than we have spoken the first or the third syllables. Similarly, in Panama, we are going to be slightly louder on the first syllable as opposed to the second and the third syllable. Now, this is basically, while it seems, as I was saying in the beginning, while it seems that speech production is a very easy job, it basically requires us paying attention to these very, very minute details and managing and coordinating between these different levels of representations so that speech production happens seamlessly, and it also happens rather rapidly. Typically, if you see, people don't make a lot of speech errors. We speak rather fluently. We speak not only with the content that we want to speak, but we also have these intonations, these different emphasis points, etc., so that we can also communicate part of our emotions, part of the emphasis non-verbally as well. So in that sense, you can see that all of these activities are rather sophisticated and require a lot of attention. Again, as I said, banana, the stress is on the second syllable. You can see the stress marker is on the second syllable here. In Panama, the stress is on the first syllable, and you can say the stress marker is on the first syllable. Now, people would wonder that, oh, is syllabification an actual process? Do we really go through syllabification? And for that, you could look at how we speak. You can just sample any amount of speech that somebody has spoken, and you could try and see whether that speech segment is organized according to actual word forms, morphology, or basically according to a stress scheme. For example, if you are talking about the word escorting, escorting typically has two morphemes. It has a free morpheme escort, it has a bound morpheme ing, and typically what we should expect is that if somebody is speaking escorting, they should basically do escort and ing. But if you record a different number of people speaking the word, you will see that when we are speaking, or just observe yourself speaking the word escorting, you will see that at S I took a pause, cort I took a pause, and ing. So what we are basically doing is I am speaking S, cor and ting, which is basically the syllabic structure in which this word is constructed. So speech production, you can see here, is not basically following morphemic boundaries, but rather it is following syllabic boundaries, and this is an important property of our speech production system, because this is how, or this is how smoothly the vocal apparatus actually moves around to create these words. So as should be clear with this example, we do not simply activate morphemes, we activate the phonemes that go with each morpheme, and we produce them in sequence. Moreover, after these morphemes are activated, we calculate the best way to organize the sequence of these phonemes into syllables, and it is the syllables that actually form the basis of how we are going to produce them, along with stress information and so on. So yeah, while we need morphemes and words to plan what to speak, speech does not simply involve activating the speech sounds in individual words. It involves much more detailed speech planning, and it basically involves activation morphemes, words. It figures out the stress marking and so on, and it in that sense becomes a slightly sophisticated, slightly coordinated activity that eventually ends up in production of speech. Now, once you have done syllabification, what we are ending up with is called a phonological word. How are we going to speak something? So, for example, if you are going to speak escorting, we have three parts. We have es, cor and ting. This is the set of phonological words, and this is how we are going to execute this. According to the Weaver++ model of William Levelt, one can begin to speak as soon as you have activated all the syllables of a given phonological word. Further, we can plan each utterance by activating a number of lemmas and morphemes simultaneously. It is a fast process, you can see, and basically the actual speech movements are planned one phonological word at a time. So, escort, escort and tuss, or escort and ting, and these are basically you can say mini executable programs that are executed one after the other in a specific sequence, so that speech production seems very, very seamless. So another part that we could sort of talk a little bit about is that how do we ensure that people are actually executing this process in an ordered manner, and this can be seen, and this has been demonstrated through a bunch of experiments, some of them done by Wheeldon and Leveled, where if you ask people to monitor how they are speaking, and if you basically ask them to let's say press a button if a particular target phoneme comes, you will see that they will press faster if the target phoneme comes from the beginning of the word than if it comes on the middle or the end of the word. Okay. So, let us just summarize how this Weaver model, or how speech production in monolinguals work, or generally how speech production works. We begin with a set of ideas that the speaker wishes to express, which is the conceptualization phase. In the next phase, we basically tied the overall idea to lexical concepts, basically words which are capable of expressing our ideas, because each language will have its own specific words that it will use to convey a particular idea. But also may require combination of words. Say for example, we have compound words, we have phrases, and so on and so forth. Now, after we have finalized on the set of lexical concepts, after these have been activated, we will activate the lemmas that correspond to these specific lexical concepts. Activating lemmas would provide us about information about the morphological properties of the words, including information about how words can be combined. After a set of morphemes has been activated and organized into a sequence, the speech sounds that are required can be activated and again placed in the syllable sequence as we discussed. Phonological encoding involves the activation of metrical structures and syllabification, so that we know how each syllable is to be produced in what order and with what emphasis. The outcome of this is a phonological word consisting of syllable sized frames. Finally, we come closer to articulation. So, what we are doing here is, during phonetic encoding, the speech production system basically consults a set of stored representations for specific syllables. So, it is basically, again as I said, mini executable program. So, how do I say S, how do I say pat, how do I say B, and basically these programs are concatenated, they are sort of brought together, and what the system does is it activates these appropriate syllable representations and places them in the correct order, so that they can be executed very quickly one after the other as the demands of the speech production system are. This final representation is called a gestural score, which basically creates executable commands of how these syllables are going to be articulated. So, that is pretty much a generic understanding or a generic description of how speech production really happens. You can see that in this model we started at the top with conceptual preparation. We had we've tied those ideas to lexical concepts. We did some selection, selected lemmas, did some morphological encoding of which form of the word we are going to use. Then we've fixed out which morphemes we are going to finally select. Went to phonological encoding, deciding syllables, creating a phonological word, and then we did phonetic encoding, phonetic gestural score, which is an executing command, and then articulation happens, which basically ends up in a sound wave, which is a physical stimulus that is received by the ears of the listener, so that comprehension can take place. So, that is all that I wanted to talk about, a generic give you a generic understanding of speech production in monolinguals, and in the next lectures we will look at some of the processing assumptions of this model and how these processing assumptions may need to be sort of tweaked a little bit in order to account for bilingual or multilingual speech production as well. Thank you.